Picture Boston in the mid-1700s. The streets are lit by the intense glow of massive bonfires, while thousands of men brawl in the dirt with clubs, fists, and brickbats. This annual explosion of violence on November 5th was called Pope Night. It was a uniquely colonial, hyper-violent mutation of England's Guy Fawkes Day. Gangs of young men and maritime workers would parade elaborate effigies through the streets, stopping at the homes of wealthy merchants. They demanded tribute, usually money or alcohol. If a homeowner refused, the gangs smashed their windows and destroyed their property. The night always climaxed in a brutal winner-take-all battle at the Mill Bridge. Rival neighborhoods smashed into each other, fighting for the honor of capturing and burning the other side's effigies. Skulls were fractured, and occasionally people were killed. For decades, city authorities tolerated the carnage. The riots were wrapped in anti-Catholic Protestant tradition, making them an acceptable, if dangerous, way for the working class to blow off steam. The combatants were deeply organized. Boston was divided into two main factions: the North End Gang, made up of shipbuilders and maritime workers, and the South End Gang, a rough group of artisans led by a shoemaker named Ebenezer Mackintosh. Miles away from the docks, a completely different social class was holding its own meetings. The Loyal Nine was a secretive group of wealthy, elite businessmen plotting in local taverns, drinking punch, and debating British tax policies. These merchants were furious about new taxes and wanted to physically resist British rule. But they were gentlemen. They had businesses to run and social standing to maintain, meaning they couldn't exactly be seen throwing rocks at royal officials in the street. Then they realized they didn't need to build a resistance movement from scratch. Boston already had a highly organized, heavily armed street militia that loved to break things. The Loyal Nine just needed to point them at a new target. These are the actual red one-penny revenue stamps from the British Stamp Act of 1765. Parliament passed this law to force the American colonies to pay for the massive debts incurred during the 7 Years' War. Every legal document, newspaper, and pamphlet now required one of these stamps to be valid. It was a direct tax on the colonial economy, and the elites realized that writing angry letters to London wasn't going to stop it. They needed physical intimidation to prevent the stamps from ever being unloaded. To get that muscle, the Loyal Nine orchestrated what they called the Union Feast. They bankrolled a massive banquet at a local tavern, bringing the bitter North End and South End gang rivals into the exact same room. The wealthy merchants laid out a deal. They supplied unlimited food and alcohol, and they promised political prestige to Ebenezer Mackintosh and the other gang leaders. All the gangs had to do was stop fighting each other and start fighting the crown. The negotiation worked. The elites secured the raw physical power they lacked, and the working-class brawlers gained wealthy patrons and a unified political purpose. This is an engraving of Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson, one of the specific royal officials targeted by this newly weaponized mob in August of 1765. Led by Mackintosh, the crowd descended on Hutchinson's mansion. They completely gutted the property, chopping down the doors, destroying the furniture, and leaving nothing but bare walls. Earlier, they had literally leveled the stampmaster's office to the ground. The violence was highly disciplined and targeted entirely at stamp distributors and government sympathizers. The mob was executing a deliberate strategy of political intimidation, engineered to paralyze the British administration. The ultimate test of this discipline came a few months later, on November 5, 1765. Instead of the usual bloody street brawl, the North and South End gangs marched peacefully together through Boston, carrying a single Union Pope effigy. That bloodless parade was a display of sheer organizational control. The chaotic, neighborhood brawlers had been successfully transformed into a disciplined, weaponized political front. This issue of the New Hampshire Gazette is dated October 31, 1765, the day before the Stamp Act took effect. By the time this paper printed, the Boston mob had won, forcing local stampmasters to resign and ensuring no one collected the taxes. Yet, despite its effectiveness, the Pope Night tradition was abruptly shut down a decade later. In 1775, General Washington issued strict orders explicitly banning his Continental Army troops from celebrating the holiday. Washington was looking at the bigger strategic picture. He knew that burning the Pope in effigy would deeply offend the Catholic French Canadians, and he desperately needed their military alliance to fight the British. The violent anti-Catholic ritual that first organized the colonial resistance had to be completely suppressed in order to win the revolution it helped start. Once the revolution began, and the elite no longer required a weaponized street militia, Pope Knight's history of ritualized extortion was stripped of its political utility. The practice of wearing masks and demanding tributes from neighbors was eventually relegated to children, settling into the harmless customs of modern Halloween. The 1765 Union provided the physical infrastructure for the Sons of Liberty, giving the movement the specialized captains and thousands of disciplined men needed to execute the coming decade of protest. Ultimately, these events revealed a new reality of American power, that colonial leaders could nullify imperial law as long as they controlled the mob's muscle.